My name is Jeff Smith. I'm a community organizer in Grand Rapids, Michigan. I've been doing community organizing work for the last 35 years in a variety of ways, but also around the issue of food justice. I've been a grower for 35 years as well, both at the local level and at my own home, and also have been growing with community gardens and several different community-based projects throughout West Michigan. The focus of the talk today is community organizing as points of intervention in the food system. Now, my task is to talk about how we can use community organizing as a way to change the current food system. And this is no easy task, since the current food system has been evolving over the past 100 years, and like any system of oppression, the current food system will resist change. However, just as the abolitionist movement ended slavery in the United States a century and a half ago, change in the current food system certainly is possible. But before I talk about specific strategies and tactics that we can use to change the current food system, I think it's important to talk about some processes for organizing around food. So first, it's important that we have an intersectional view of the current food system. Now, what I mean by that is that it's essential to look at the issue of food and the food system through a variety of analytical lenses. We cannot separate how economics, race, gender, environment, etc., how those things impact how we understand the current food system and how we want to respond to it. To do so might mean we end up doing more harm than we wanted to, and our actions might be woefully inadequate. Secondly, it's important that we simultaneously work to create a food system, a new food system, while working to dismantle the existing one. So the current food system will not go away on its own. And what we have learned from previous social movements is that we need to not only fight against the current food system, and in this case, a food system that's unhealthy and unsustainable, we also have to simultaneously work to create the kind of food system that we actually want. This two sides of the coin approach is not only necessary, it also provides important entry points for people to become engaged in the work. Okay, so now that we have a little bit of a framework about how to organize to change the food system, let's look at some actual strategies that will help us to accomplish the goal of changing the current food system. And these are not in any particular order, but I believe it's important that we need to implement them simultaneously if we are to truly be effective in our efforts. So the first strategy is community skill building strategies. So in this strategy, it's crucial that we create opportunities that allow as many people as possible to actually learn the skills that are centered around food growing, food preservation, and healthy nutrition. With this strategy, we can employ a number of tactics to help people learn from important food-centered skills. So tactic one is actually just growing food, learning how to grow food. So it's important to create opportunities for people to grow some of their own food. Not only because this will not only give them the critical skills that they need, it will give them new ways of seeing how the current food system is unhealthy and unsustainable. People can grow food in containers, raised beds, in the ground directly through community gardens, and actually be part of community-supported agriculture, or CSAs, which often allow people involved to be part of the food growing and harvesting process. So it's just really important for people to have that kind of basic skill, fundamental skill, that all of us essentially could benefit from. Tactic number two, food preparation. So the more we have the skills to prepare food from scratch, the more likely it is for us to not be dependent on the current food system. Food preparation is an important skill, but in the current economic system, it is difficult for many people to eat well based on what they can afford and what they have time for. Therefore, one way to think about food preparation as a skill is to view it as a communal activity. If we had community kitchens that were neighborhood-based, we could make food collectively to save money and time. Community kitchens could be located in people's homes, they could be in churches, or other community spaces that would allow people to prepare food collectively, share recipes, and make enough food for multiple meals. Community kitchens would allow people who work long hours and those who are making poverty-level wages an opportunity to eat better, save money, save time, and even engage in community-building activities. Tactic number 3, food preservation. So food preservation skills would help us to become less dependent on the current food system as well. Food preservation skills would consist of things like canning, freezing, and drying of foods. And these skills could also be practiced in community kitchen spaces and would also contribute to community building in and of themselves. But we should also think about including seed saving as a form of food preservation, since seeds are increasingly becoming genetically modified as to not allow them to be self-reproducing. Additionally, if more of us practice seed saving, we could create a local seed bank, which would not only preserve biological diversity, it would allow more people access to the opportunities of growing more of their own food. Strategy number 2 is what we call food worker strategy. Now, this strategy is important because it exposes how the current, what's called foodie movement, is highly privileged. So a food worker strategy would force the larger society to look more closely at the current food system, but it would also create possibilities for grassroots food worker organizing. So a first tactic might be this: organizing farm workers. Now, organizing farm workers is not a new thing, but there is little attention given to one of the few jobs that doesn't guarantee any minimum wage requirements. Farm worker organizing is an important tactic because it not only exposes the exploitative nature of this labor force, it would provide an opportunity to the larger society to see how unjust, how racist, and how unsustainable the current food system is. In Michigan, migrant workers have stated in the last report from the Michigan Civil Rights Commission that their living and working conditions are as bad, if not worse, than they were in 1960. And that's a report you can get online at the Michigan Civil Rights Commission office. Tactic number 2 is actually restaurant worker organizing. Increasingly, many of us ask if the food served at restaurants is grown locally, which is a good thing. But we rarely ask whether or not the workers who work in the kitchen or who wait on tables actually make a living wage or are allowed to organize. Restaurant workers, like farm workers, make poverty-level wages and work in exploitative conditions. Creating greater opportunities for restaurant workers to organize would not only challenge the chain restaurant's power within the current food system, it could lead to more collective forms of organizing around food. Now, this strategy number 3, just food policy strategy. So the current food system is able to survive in part because of all the federal and state policies. And these policies, which provide massive subsidies, means that we all pay for an unhealthy, unjust, and unsustainable food system. Instead, we need policies and practices that are based on food justice and food sovereignty. So tactic number 1 could be direct action for just food policies. So considering how unjust the current democratic process is in the United States and how money largely influences electoral politics, it would be more effective to have mass movements to force federal and state policy to adopt food policies that are bioregional, that support small, community-based agriculture, and redirects tax subsidies for food justice work. If the current Farm Bill funding, which is billions of dollars, were redirected to local food production where everyone made a livable wage, imagine how much local food could be produced that was just and sustainable. Tactic number 2, practical food sovereignty. If taxpayer funds were redirected towards local food sovereignty initiatives, we would not only have more financial resources to make sure everyone eats well, but to create a food system where everyone would be allowed to participate in deciding what kind of a system we want. And this essentially is what food sovereignty is to practice collective decision-making about food that is local and sustainable. Tactic number 3, just land use. Just land use would mean that the way we use land for food production would be radically altered away from the monocrop food production that is based upon expanding markets. Just land use would mean growing food in both rural and urban settings that produce fresh food that could be more directly consumed instead of using the bulk of land in the country for mass production of cash crops. Just land would also mean that food would not have to travel over 1,000 miles on average before it is eaten, since food would stay within the bioregions that it is grown. Strategy number 4. This is called the civil society food strategy. A civil society food strategy would mean that more people take an active role in both creating the new food system and resisting the current food system. So tactic number 1, creating food councils and holding food assemblies. As a new local food system is created in this developmental process, there needs to be localized efforts to create food councils and to host food assemblies. Both of these systems can create and guarantee greater public participation. A food council and food assemblies would develop policies and practices to ensure that food justice and food sovereignty principles were enacted. Tactic number 2, direct action for resisting the current food system. So direct action against the current food system could take on a variety of forms that people have used for centuries. So there could be boycotts. There could be educational campaigns to raise awareness about the unjust aspects of the current food system. Another aspect of that could actually be ending the advertisement of unhealthy processed foods and any other means of making it difficult, advertisement of unhealthy and processed foods, period, and other means of making it difficult for the current food system to continue to exploit workers. And lastly, this strategy could look at creating ways to engage in counteracting sort of the unhealthy food system that actually destroys the environment. Lastly, it is important to say that we need to continue to provide food assistance programs, such as food pantries and meal sites. But we also need to ensure that these programs make room for equity and food system justice work. Such work facilitates conversations with those experiencing food insecurity. The strategies and tactics just discussed can be implemented at food pantries or food assistance sites, and it's important to recognize and support both. We need safety nets to make sure that people are not experiencing food insecurity and malnutrition as we work towards creating a new food system. The kind of food system we create should be a food system that is based on justice, ecological sustainability, good health, and compassion for all. Thank you.